There, I've updated my nice little note. I should add another note that says, feel free to ask for information. There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's time for another day of reading. I am once again out here in the forest, where I live. If you weren't here last night, I enjoyed playing Dave the Diver, which is why this snorkel is sitting here. Anyway, let's get on with it. Today I will be continuing Immortality Starts with Generosity. I can be heard, right? Excellent. As you may have heard yesterday, Chen Halpern and Lan Fen decided to start their celebration of the coming palace exams by getting into a bar fight. They chose to do this in a Lan family bar. For those new here, the Lan family are the ones who sold Lan Fen to Chen Haoran. The fight went well for them, with Lan Fen slapping the crap out of Lan Junjie for like 5 minutes straight, and Chen Haoran making a new friend, whose name is Xie Jing. He's apparently from the South, but not the American South, which is different. Good times. During the fight, Xie Jin beat up a Lan family lady named Lan Jia, though no one saw how he did it. A while later, they headed into the forest with Song Yue Lin and their new friend to attend the palace exams. I believe it was a week or so later. When they arrived, they found an order from the city lord for all participants to turn back. This made everyone quite angry. Nobody really liked that. Hello, Atai. I can turn down the music a notch. Is that better? I'll turn it down another notch. Oh, back up a notch. There we go. I don't know why my mouth doesn't want to work today. Please bear with me. Bear with me. Bear. Where was I? Ah, yes, the recap. Let's see. Everyone was upset about the palace exams be being turned back from where they're supposed to be, which is apparently an abuse of the city lord's authority. So, a small horde of cultivators and their grandpas, who were usually Liquid Meridian realms, all went back to the city lord's palace. There, they were all informed by with the city lord and the examiner there that the exam was cancelled by Prince Shen Jianyu, the 13th prince of the empire, who was visiting at the time. And, as per Song Yue Lin, he's an absolute madman. Rem, I'm glad you could make it. I'm currently doing a recap. How much do you need recapped? Everything? I'll just continue the recap from yesterday for now. Let's see. Song Yue Lin was apparently quite scared of this visiting imperial prince, and chose to force Chen Haoran to flee the city, as imperial attention would be bad for the Chen family. Let's see. Lan Fen, of course, didn't want to go, as she was still in the middle of her plan to kill all of her family members. After a bit of an argument, during which Lan Fen accidentally broke Chen Haoran's heart, as she had not yet submitted the annulment papers for their marriage, and he had thought there might be meaning behind that. She did end up getting left behind. After several days of running from the city, Song Lin finally slowed down to have a chat with Chen Haoren, who would refuse to talk to him for something like 2 days. In the ensuing conversation, Chen Haoren finds out that no, the Chen family was not investigating him. Song Lin had come from the Chen family entirely of his own volition, after reading the reports from Manager Lin. This, of course, upset Chen Haoren, as he had been expecting that if he was dragged back to the Chen family, it would at least be a Chen family who was aware of his changes, not a Chen family who had heard nothing. So he decided to escape from someone in an entire realm above him. Fortunately, he had adequate resources in the form of 100 million taels and a significantly sized liquid meridian beast core. He threw the tails at him, then he threw the beast core at him, and then he cut the beast core in half with his canyon carving sword, thus escaping from the liquid meridian realm manager Song Lin. Uh, did I mention he was doing this while he was jumping off of a cliff over a waterfall that he described as tall as skyscrapers? Yes, that was an interesting detail. Anyway, he apparently survived the fall and found himself in some kind of cave system. On exploring, he discovered the cave system was in fact quite large and had several hmm, pools of what is apparently water surrounded by glowing blue moss. The moss is eaten by a bunch of sloths, and the sloths are eaten by angry crickets. Angry dog-sized crickets. Anyway, he is currently being pestered by one sloth who enjoys dive bombing into the pools that Chen Haoren uses to further his cultivation, since the pools have liquid chi in them, or at least are water aspected, they are quite good for his water spirit root. Anyway, he soon comes to get along with that one sloth that keeps dive bombing him and was telling him his woes about how Song Lin had betrayed him and how they weren't actually friends and it made him sad. While he's doing so, he feels his connection to Lan Fan break, thus freeing up his only slot for his special gift skill 100 blessings ch- cheddar prosperity. I don't remember the name of it. It's a very long name. Let me check my notes. Notes. Let's see. Is this it? No, this isn't it. How about this one? No, that's the same one. That's a picture of a sword. There we are. Benefactor's everlasting 100 blessings prosperity. Wow, my bear writing is terrible. Those who were here before will recall that the 100 blessings requires a connection with an individual who, when he gives them a gift, he will receive 100 times the value of that gift in return. And seeing as how Lan Fen had apparently broken their connection, probably by turning in those marriage annulment papers, or dying, he immediately sets out to turn that sloth he was talking to into his sloth pet. Does anyone need any other reminders at this point? The recap's back. There we go. A sloth. I don't know. He hasn't described it very well. I know it has large claws. which makes me think it's some kind of climbing animal with large claws, so I assume it's a kind of squirrel. A very large squirrel. I'll have to break into the ranger station and look for another National Geographic guide. See if one of them has a sloth in it. Oh wait, I have a Google in this phone I got. I'll have to Google it later. I assume they are very slow animals. Yes, very large, slow squirrels. The best kind of squirrel for eating. Ooh. Anyway, shall we start the story anew? I'm afraid I won't be reading as much today as my voice is a little on the crackly side. But I know how much power I've got left in the tank, so let's go. Chapter 50. This young master is small. Lil Float. The sloth ignored him. Slack off. It coughed. Karn. The sloth hacked and threw up. That name was pretty disgusting, sorry. Chen Howren sighed as the sloth disregarded his attempts to name it and floated away once again. He was stuck facing a philosophical reality. What was a pet? How did an animal become a pet? He couldn't just buy the sloth, nor could he just adopt it and claim it. Was a sloth, much less a cultivating one, even something he could domesticate? Did he have to domesticate it for it to be a pet? Chen Howren stewed over these questions as he once more submerged himself in a pool and cultivated. Or rather, gave the appearance that he was cultivating. His distraction hindered any real progress, and he instead silently counted down. With warning from his sense, he braced himself for the sloth dropping back down into the pool with a loud splash. No matter how many times he annoyed it into floating off, the sloth always dropped down into whatever pool he was occupying. It was an annoying habit, but one that he'd tolerate in order to have more opportunities to win it over. Besides, if it was polite enough, at least polite. Besides, it was at least polite enough to wait for him to finish cultivating before soaking him. He ripped off a piece of moss and handed it over to the sloth. Its glowing blue tongue tickled his hand as it ate. It squealed at him, its previous annoyance long forgotten, then proceeded to paddle around the pool. I didn't know sloths could swim. Can squirrels swim? I'm sorry, I shouldn't interrupt myself. I think I'll call you Phelps. Chen Howren nodded to himself. It felt right. Seeing that you like swimming so much, why does this song have lyrics? I love Nat King Cole as much as anyone, but this is supposed to be a playlist with no lyrics. Let's see. He called him Phelps. Seeing that you like swimming. Unless it was a girl. He frowned. How did one tell a sloth's sex anyway? Come here, Phelps, he cooed. Phelps snorted and floated away. Chin Howren looked on enviously. It would be nice if he could learn how to float like that, or better yet, fly. Of course, it would be best if he could find a technique to do that and gift it to someone. He frowned. He couldn't really gift a technique to a sloth, could he? Was it even intelligent enough to accept gifts? Chen Howren didn't think his power would let him make a connection to something he couldn't give gifts to. Or perhaps it would. It wasn't like this was some kind of video game. He sighed and rose out of the pool. Trying to make a pet his connection would limit what he could gift it. It's not like a sloth had any use for weapons or scrolls, after all. On the other hand, he didn't have to worry about it not accepting gifts because of pride, nor did he have to be circumspect around it lest he reveal something about his power. It also helped that Phelps was weaker than he was. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to try to connect with an animal. Not every spiritual pool in the space cavern was the same. While the majority held fatigue-removing properties, they were all on a spectrum of effectiveness that Shenhauern could only tell through feeling. He did discover that it was better to alternate his use of the pools between cultivation sessions. For whatever reason, it kept up the efficiency of his practice. Perhaps it was a quirk from their creation. Shenhauern towed his way around a frothy, bubbling pool. Droplets of burning water sizzled on his skin. A cricket burst out of the thicket of steam, and he casually slapped it into the water and watched it melt. How this cavern came to be was a mystery. Water gathering underground like this was normal. What could be heating it, though? He didn't smell any sulfur, and the Clear Springs mountains weren't volcanic. Walking away from the boiling hot pool, he knelt at the edge of one right next to it and dipped his hands in. It was warm. He scooped up the water with his hands and drank it. It was hot, but fresh, with no metallic taste. Not only was the distribution of heat radically different between nearby pools, there was also none of the minerals so common to the hot springs back on Earth. Where did all the water even come from? All these independent pools, but no source to feed them. Under all this heat. He drank several handfuls till he had his fill, marked the stones nearby for future reference, then continued on. Using the swift-wind sword as a walking stick to check for sudden drops, although he was I see. Although he wasn't any closer to finding an exit, he was slowly mapping out the area around his camp. Shenhauern sighed. It would be nice if he could find anything other than crickets, sloths, and moss. Idly, he pinched some moss and rubbed it between his fingers. What would he get if he connected to Phelps and gave him the moss? Perhaps Phelps could float because of his diet? Shenhauern sniffed the glowing moss, but, through the incredible power of common sense, resisted the urge to eat it. Deciding that this exploration was a lost cause, he turned around and made his way back to camp. He pulled out a small biscuit from his storage bag and chewed it as he went. He had enough food for a month at least. He either had to find a way out before then, or get a taste for cricket. Shenhauern shuddered at the thought and wiped away the cold sweat that prickled on the back of his neck. He froze. Cold. Shenhauern did not move and cycled his chi. He felt a small chill on the back of his neck. The chill grew till he could feel it with his back. He looked down at his steam-covered legs. It undulated around him as it always did, but the pattern of it was clear. It was flowing away from him. Shenhauern whirled, and the first blast of steam hit him in the face. It was rushing now, a wall of steam that was growing ever denser and hotter. The sheer heat burned his skin and overwhelmed the protection provided by his chi. He cursed and quickly jumped into a pool and dove deep. Above him, the water roiled, and the blue light of the cavern shone brighter than the water before the water unnaturally stilled and the light became filtered. Shenhauern waited until his lungs burned before swimming up. He flexed his chi and broke past the ice covering the pool and entered a new world. What the fuck? Sorry, I don't have my button to beep today. His first thought was that it was cold. It shocked the heat from him, and goose flesh pimpled across his arms. Every mouthful of air was followed by a misty cloud. The pools around him were frozen, with only the hottest still bubbling away. Frost covered the rocks, and the glowing moss looked practically crystallized, their light dull. His second thought was that he could see. The steam was gone. It had risen to the roof of the cave in an endless sea of clouds. What it revealed was a dark landscape of rocks and frozen pools that stretched farther than the eye could see. With frozen moss below and covered moss above, the cavern was terrifyingly dim. Ahead of him was an outcropping of rock that stood high above the ground. With teeth chattering, Chen Haoren rushed for it, cycling his chi so that he could dig his fingers into the icy stone and climb up. At its highest point, he stared wide-eyed back from where he came, then to the endless expanse ahead. Instead of pools, he saw lakes, both boiling and frozen. Stalactites the size of towers hung from the ceilings, and equally large stalagmites rose from below to meet them. Skyscraper-sized columns of stone separated the roof and the cavern floor. Chen Haoren shivered. Whether from cold or from fear, he didn't know. This place was far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Blue lightning flashed from the clouds and shattered a stalagmite. The echoing thunder hammered in his chest. Chen Haoren slowly climbed down under flashing blue clouds, mindful of the target he made. The thunder that beat down on him threatened his grip far more than the ice did. I'm a cultivator. What the fuck am I doing? He steeled his resolve and jumped down rather than continue making a fool out of himself. He landed heavily on the ground, chi absorbing the shock. Chen Howard shook out his knees more out of instinct than need. He didn't need to fear a fall like that. He had power now. The clouds rumbled and rain fell down in heavy sheets. It pounded on his head and shoulders, and Chen Haoren bent under the force. Rain and thunder filled the cavern in one long, unceasing roar. Hunched over and cowed, he slowly made his way back to his shelter. What was a cultivator in the face of nature? End chapter 50. This is some very odd weather for a cave. Most caves I'd know, I'd never seen any kind of weather. It's rather part of the attraction for going into caves. Sometimes you get some dripping water, but that's always around the stalagmites. Or tights. I'm a bear, I don't know the difference. Chapter 51. This young master will explore nature. The roar of nature filled his head and drowned out whatever other sounds were to be heard on his way back to camp. That was why he saw the hunt before he heard it. The band of sloths he had first found when he entered the cavern had come to the ground for some reason. The crickets, of course, had wasted no time in punishing them for that decision. 8 sloths were fighting 3 times that number in crickets. It was a vicious fight, though the slight sloths were enhanced with the power of chi. That did not change the fact that they were sloths, and were thus much slower than the insects. Chen Howard couldn't hear the horrible chirping or angry squealing over the sound of the rain, but he could imagine it, seeing the bloody scene before him. Each sloth was beset upon by multiple crickets, and though their sharp claws left lethal wounds whenever they connected, they received twice as many in return from their more nimble foes. The frost-covered stones ran slick with blood. A particularly angry sloth, fighting above a frozen pool, shattered the ice beneath it and dragged 3 crickets down with it, looking more like sharks as they thrashed in the water. Some sloths floated into the air to escape. The limitations of their ability were revealed, however, when the crickets jumped into the air after them with their powerful legs. The sloths had no mobility in the air and were easy targets for the crickets, who snatched them with their forelimbs, and they tussled for a brief moment, before inevitably the sloths were dragged screaming down to the ground. He found Phelps. Chen Howren flexed his chi and broke into a run. Phelps had placed himself at the edge of the violence right in front of the boulder Chen Howren used to block his camp. A cricket leaped forward and disemboweled itself on Phelps's claws. Another cricket lunged while he was distracted, but Phelps had moved before it did. His claws swiped across the cricket's bulbous eyes and blinded it. Phelps floated into the air rather than finish it off, avoiding a third cricket that barreled in and slammed against the boulder. He cut short his floating before he rose too high and fell like a stone on both crickets, skewering them with his claws. Then the fourth cricket landed on him and sunk its mandibles into his back leg. Phelps squealed in pain and rolled to throw off the insect, his desperate move only opening him up for a fifth and sixth cricket to close in for the kill. Phelps had fought well, but in the end he was simply not fast enough in the face of more numerous, quicker crickets. He would die fighting alone. It was good that he wasn't. Chen Howren cleaved through the two crickets that thought to take advantage of Phelps' predicament and then beheaded the cricket atop him. Well, Phelps weakly squealed at him. "You're lucky that I'm a sucker for the sunk cost fallacy," Chen Howren said. He turned to the other crickets. 16 left. The rest of the sloths had already been slaughtered. One scimitar glowed blue. Canyon carving sword. There was a stutter in the uniform sound of rain. Where his sword light flowed, no water fell, and the rain could only wait for it to pass. The stones split as the energy river annihilated every cricket in its way before ending at a frozen pool and bursting it in a shower of ice and water. 8 crickets left. The crouching tiger earrings blinked and the crickets froze. Chen Howren crossed the swift wind scimitars together and slew 4 more before the rest had the presence of mind to flee. He let them go. He had a patient to tend to. Chen Howren watched the rain from the shelter of his camp. A fire crackled, glowing blue from using moss as fuel, and provided blessed warmth. Phelps snapped next to him on the bedding, his injured leg cleansed and bandaged up. How it would heal was up to luck at this point. Chen Howren had done his best, but he was no veterinarian, nor did he have any kind of medical training. So he couldn't properly diagnose the injuries of a super sloth in another world. He could only hope the medicine and Phelps's chi were enough. Connection negative. No dice, huh? Outside, a few crickets rifled among the corpses, though they were wise enough to steer clear from him. Shinhauern watched 2 crickets squabble over the corpse of a sloth. They wrestled around it before the victor finally kicked away his opponent and dragged the body away. It was easy enough to guess why the sloths were on the ground. He doubted they could stay on the roof with how dense the cloud cover was, which made them easy pickings for the predators below. An entire ecosystem adapted to the insane environment they lived in. Which meant that the sudden cold snap wasn't a fluke, but a regular occurrence in this place. Chen Howren grabbed another clump of moss and threw it into the fire. Some of his questions were answered, and more mysteries that needed answers revealed themselves in turn. It was a depressingly familiar cycle. One thing was clear, whatever the cause was, the cold snap came from one direction. That meant it had a source. Whether or not finding that source would lead to a way out was a matter of luck, but it was the only option he had right now. Phelps blinked open his eyes and yawned. He slowly turned his head to and fro and squealed when he saw Chen Howren. Morning. Not that he actually knew what time it was. He passed Phelps some moss and watched him eat. Slowly he stretched out his hand and placed a finger on the sloth's head. Phelps stilled, and for a moment Howren thought he would pull away. Instead, Phelps scarfed down the rest of the moss and pushed his head into Chen Howren's palm. Chen Howren smiled and scratched behind his ears. "You're quite the genius, aren't you?" Out of all the sloths, Phelps had killed the most crickets. He'd closed off their avenues of attack and predicted their moves before they made them, so that his claws were already in motion before the crickets even jumped. Even if Chen Howren couldn't connect with him, what he had seen today was more than enough to convince him to bring the sloth along. Would Phelps want to come with him? It was an easy enough answer. The sloth would die if he left him here while injured. He couldn't afford to wait for his leg to heal either. Chenhauern had returned to camp to collect his thoughts, but right now was the perfect opportunity to explore the cavern before steam filled it again. The real question then was whether or not he could trust Phelps not to attack him. At the end of the day, he was still a wild animal, and Chenhauern would have to carry him. While his defenses were tough, he didn't want to risk those claws trying to rip open his neck. Neck. The word stirred something within him. His eyes drifted down to Phelps's neck. I did say that I wanted you to be my pet, didn't I? Chen Howard closed his eyes in thought. After a moment, he opened them and a silver necklace appeared in his hand. Deeming it unsuitable, he tossed it into his storage bag and summoned more jewelry. Eventually, he found a satisfactory one, a simple gold necklace with a flat circular pendant on which a sun was carved. He flipped it over to its smooth back and pressed the tip of the swift-wind scimitar against it. With great concentration and supernatural steadiness that only Chi could give him, he carved the letter P into the pendant. He blew out the breath he'd been holding once finished and admired his work. A bit rough, but seeing as how he'd carved gold with a sword, he considered it a good first attempt. Carefully, he brought the necklace to Phelps, who curiously sniffed it. Chen Howard wrapped the chain around his neck and held it there, unclasped. Besides some snuffling, there wasn't any distress one would expect an animal to have from something wrapped around its neck. He clasped the necklace and leaned back. Phelps squealed. A pet has to have a collar. Connection valid. The rain fell in heavy sheets. The air was biting cold. Shenhauer bundled up in as many layers as he could, expensive silk and dyed cotton just waiting to be ruined in weather it was never meant for. Hmm. Yes, hello, Charlie. It would have to suffice. He stepped to the entrance and stopped an inch away from the curtain of falling water. His breath hitched and a shiver ran feather-light down his spine. It was intimidating. He didn't know what waited for him out there in the vast unknown. At the same time, however, he felt his heart beat in his chest. This was an adventure into a mysterious land. He didn't know what awaited him. He drew a sword and turned to the wall. Chi flowed through the profound rank weapon, and it easily cut through the stone in curving slashes. Chetnauer blinked away dust and stone ships and brushed away the carved message. Chenhauer was here. There was no telling what would happen in the future after all. Two strong furry arms, tipped with long black claws, reached from behind him and wrapped around his chest. You comfortable? Phelps squealed in his ear, snugly bundled into Chenhauer's back and secured with a repurposed robe. He handed the sloth a piece of glowing blue moss. Phelps happily chewing, and a welcome relief from the overwhelming din of rain and thunder. Received hundredfold, water's light spirit moss. Let's go then. End chapter 51. This seems like an excellent time for a PSA. Wild animals are not intended to be pets. Wolves are not dogs, bears are not toys, and big cats aren't little cats. Little cats living outside and avoiding people aren't little cats living inside and loving people. Trying to turn one into the other is a fool's gambit, and you'll quickly discover that no, the Rangers were not just keeping all the bear hugs to themselves. Let the wildlife live a wild life. Interlude: The Laughing Monk. It is said that every step a young cultivator takes is a step made in defiance of heaven, just as it is said that every step an old cultivator takes is in tune with heaven. Such is the nature of cultivation, to rage against the laws of heaven till one becomes it. Song Yue Lin had become heaven. By that standard, it was only natural that the cultivators he looked down on would defy him. Young Master Chen's ploy had been clever and his decisiveness surprising. Few would think to use such a valuable beast core simply to escape. Judging from the strength of its detonation, it had to belong to one of the higher bloodlines. Just one of the many treasures young Master Chen seemed to keep in reserve. Song Yue Lin had been forced to activate his Dead Knight armor, while simultaneously striking out with his full force to avoid taking a fatal injury. a reaction that was only possible through the accumulation of experience. Song Yue-lin knew other Liquid Meridian realms who would have died in the same situation. He had underestimated young Master Chen far too much. The explosion that had forced him out of the valley and back into the frankly ludicrous mountain of gold tails young Master Chen summoned. In the next instant, Song Yuelin was diving down into the river once again. He immediately stretched out his senses and shadows as soon as he hit the water and shot down the river like a loosed arrow. A sky blue pearl shined from its hidden place within his robe, and a translucent film covered him, letting him breathe beneath water and removing what little resistance it placed on him. He followed the course of the river through its underground path till it opened into another waterfall on the other side of the mountain that fell into an even deeper valley. Over the next 3 days, he plumbed the depths of that valley and swept the river in both directions multiple times. It was on the fourth day that Song Yuelin gave up the search. It was impossible that young Master Chen had been killed in the fall, and even more impossible that he wouldn't have found a body had that been the case. It was equally impossible that he could have avoided Song Yuelin's search, on his own at least. There was the possibility that young Master Chen possessed a treasure that helped him escape from the river. Given the treasures he'd already displayed, it wasn't so outlandish a theory. The question then was, where did he go? Trying to track him now was an exercise in futility. There were no traces to even hint at a direction. Song Yuelin was left with only one option. "Master Song," said the startled servant, "you've returned." The morning staff had woken to find Song Yuelin pacing the entrance hall of the manor, having snuck back into Clear Spring City in the middle of the night. It was an unfortunate truth that he did not understand the young master enough to guess where he would go. Thus, he could only return to the city and hope for news. "Where is Lady Fen?" Song Yuelin said. Lan Fen had been the first person he sought out as soon as he returned. Predictably, however, she was nowhere to be seen. "She left with her people the other day after you and young Master Chen did," the servant stammered. "She is yet to return." Nor did he expect her to. Without him there was nothing to ward off her family's Liquid Meridian realms. Going into hiding was the safest option. He would have to wait for her to reveal herself when she made her move against the Lan family. Not that there was any guarantee that young Master Chen would return to her side. He simply didn't know enough about the boy to make any hard calls on what he might do next. He stopped. No, not a boy. Boys did not fully escape from Liquid Meridian realms. That unconscious disrespect is what had seen young Master Chen slip through his fingers in the first place. Song Yuelin sighed and massaged his temples. How had things spiraled so out of control? When he had first received the report from Manager Lin about the young master's strange behavior and sudden influx of wealth, he didn't put it in his eyes at all. Such a small matter hadn't been worth reporting to Lord Chen, and seeing as how he'd been given a period of rest, Song Yuelin decided to make a short trip to Clear Spring City, resolve whatever the issue was, then return to the Chen family for merit. It was supposed to be a relaxing change of pace compared to his typical business. Not this mess. He should have left after meeting young Master Chen. He should have left after discovering the morning pool. He should have left after their talk in the wake of Lan Fen's assault on the Lan family. He should have left before he mixed personal feelings with his duty once again. Song Yuelin had been curious, he told himself. He'd long managed the reports of young Master Chen's behavior, so seeing that he was so different in person was fascinating. He was bored, he argued. Even killing grew banal after so many decades. This was refreshing in comparison. He had to get to the bottom of these mysterious resources, he reasoned. He had to do his duty to the Chen family and help them develop. All lies. Chen Chitao's son had shown him empathy. Song Yuelin was wrapped in chains of his own making. At his waist, his thunder messenger jade shook. Song Yuelin twitched and gently thumbed the fiery word carved into its flat surface. Report. Speaking of Chen, and he shall appear. Song Yuelin channeled his chi into the jade and carved out his own brusque reply. I have lost the second young master. It was not the report he was supposed to give. There was an uncomfortably long pause. He could imagine the look he'd receive had he said such a thing in person. Empire? On his own. On his own. It was a humiliating admission. Song Yue Lin had many peers, both enemy and colleague, who would laugh themselves to death hearing that one so far beneath him in cultivation managed to escape right before his eyes. Only fools and dead men paraded their pride. Is that music doing words again? Sorry about that. It was a humiliating admission. Song Yuelin had many peers, both enemy and colleague, who would laugh themselves to death hearing that one so far beneath him in cultivation managed to escape right before his eyes. Only fools and dead men paraded their pride in front of Chen Chitao, however. There was another pause. Song Yuelin went over the scene in his mind. The calm deliberation, the idle tapping of his fingers against his desk, the eventual answer. Leave him be. You really were worried for nothing, young Master Chen, he murmured. It would take more than just treasure to make Chen Chitao blink. Shen Jian Yu gone. The only stroke of good fortune to be had in this situation was that the Peacock Prince left not long after they did. Not long after they did. Whatever his reasons for coming here, it hadn't been for them or the port. Miracle of miracles, the city lord hadn't given anything away, although for safety's sake they would have to restrict ships from docking in the region for the next few months. Return. Song Yuelin exhaled a shaky breath. It was not an unexpected order, but he still felt torn. He had much he wanted to say to young Master Chen. Acknowledged. It would not stop him from doing his duty, however. He put away the jade and turned toward the entrance doors. It was time to deal with his other problem. The doors shattered into a shower of splinters, and Lan Xishen strode into the manor surrounded by armed guards. Lan Fen! He bellowed. Chen Horan! Present yourselves! Chi pitched his demand and carried it across the estate. Song Yuelin heard shattering porcelain and panic shouts of the servants coming from within the manor. He frowned. Lan Xishen stopped short after seeing Song Yuelin, his eyes widening. It's a trap! Green energy gathered around his palms, and a misty green chi flowed from his body like a spring breeze and swept towards Song Yuelin. Liquid shadow spilled from his sleeves and blocked the opposing chi. The other Lan family warriors assumed a defensive formation. Song Yuelin hummed. More liquid shadow flooded towards the warriors, forcing Lan Xishen to defend them. What were the odds that the Lan family would come to cause trouble the same day he had returned? Why would they think young Master Chen and Lan Fen were here and not him? The answer was obvious. They were fooled. It seems I've underestimated Lady Fen as well, Song Yuelin said. She knew he would return to the manor. Perhaps she'd left spies behind in the staff. He was more disturbed from losing young Master Chen than he thought to not notice such a thing. That's twice now. He really had looked down on the two of them far too much. With a twist of liquid shadow, two curved obsidian daggers fell into his hands. He would not make that mistake again. You are trespassing on Chen family property. His smile was grim. Die! End interlude. I really like Song Yue Lin. I hope he's not gone from the story for too long, given he'll apparently be returning to wherever the rest of the Chen family live. Do we have any questions in chat before I move on? right then. Interlude: The Valkyrie 3. It had been 9 days since Song Yue Lin and Chen Haoren had left Clear Spring City. After they did, Lan Fen immediately returned to the manor to disperse her people. She had the ability to avoid the hunt of a superior cultivator. They did not. In any case, their use was coming to an end. She could feel the wind change the moment Shen Jianyu cancelled the palace exams. Despite Song Yue Lin's fears, the prince took no other action after cancelling the exams. There was no announcement declaring them criminals nor any search done at the estate. Shen Jianyu stayed for 3 days and left without a word, the city seeming to breathe a sigh of relief when he did. The damage had been done, though. While the city lord still kept his position, the major families were no longer content with the status quo. Her previous sabotage became pointless as they rallied around the Lan family and sought to raise up its patriarch to become a counterbalancing force. It was not all well for the Lan family. She was sure they had to give up much in the end in order for the deal to be struck, but it would all be worth it in the end. A crystal transformation realm was that valuable. It also meant that the Lan family could now devote their time to hunting down Lan Fen. She had been holed up in the Silver Ring space ever since leaving the manor. She only left to gather news and otherwise devoted herself to harmonizing with the heaven-splitting claw. "You must be annoyed," the White Tyrant said, floating in the white space of the Silver Ring. "All your planning and preparations ruined by the whims of a higher power." Lan Fen stopped her cycling of the heaven-spitting claw and glared at him. "Such is the nature of the strong." He hung upside down and poked her head with a ghostly finger. "They are stones in a calm pond. No matter how softly they are dropped in the water, they still disturb the peace with their ripples."
"It would be better if we knew why he came here,"
Lan Fen said. The White Tyrant shrugged.
"Who cares? I'm more interested in what you're going to do now."
"Finish off the Lan family, of course."
"Why?" he asked. "With your talent, you're guaranteed to become a crystal transformation realm in the future. Why not leave and come back when you're stronger?"
"If I can deal with them now, well then why bother with it later?"
The White Tyrant laughed and righted himself.
"I knew there was a reason I liked you."
"If you like me so much, then tell me how the situation is at the Chen estate."
"They started fighting,"
the White Tyrant said. It had been a shock to discover Song Yue Lin returning to the city by himself after the panic he'd showed. It was a cold feeling to discover Chen Haoren wasn't with him. Pitting the Lan family against him was both to test him and potentially remove a precious liquid meridian elder.
"And there's no sign of Chen Haoren?"
"Do you really think I wouldn't notice him?"
Lan Fen was surprised the White Tyrant noticed anyone beneath him. He had never had the highest opinion of Chen Haoren to begin with. She wouldn't put it past him not to register his existence at all.
"Of course not," she said. "I am simply worried."
The White Tyrant snorted.
"If your pet leaving worried you so much, you should have taken him instead."
"He knows his own situation best. I would not rob him of his choice."
"For all the good that did him. Do you think the shadow bastard buried him in the mountains?"
"There is no reason for him to do so."
Song Yue Lin was frustratingly inscrutable about even the most minor details of himself, much less his motivations. She believed in Chen Haoren's judgment of character, however.
"If murder was his goal, he would have done so sooner."
"And yet the shadow bastard returned alone, and the moron is missing."
The White Tyrant leaned in the air as if draped over a couch and looked down on her.
"Who's to say he's not here to clean up loose ends?"
Lan Fen hummed.
"The fight should be over now, yes?"
The White Tyrant huffed.
"He killed them all."
"There is our answer, then.
She stood up and smoothed out the wrinkles in her robes.
If he was seriously hunting me, he would have worked with the Lan family.
You're going to meet him.
Of course,
Lan Fen said.
I have to find out what happened to Chen Howren after all.
He was alive, she knew that, but if he wasn't, she would make sure he was not lonely on the final road. The Chen estate had not been treated with respect by her great uncle. The wrought iron gates had been wrenched open, and he had seen fit to barrel through the shrubbery and ornaments in a straight path to the manor entrance. Song Yuelin stepped out through the broken doors to meet her. Lan Fen peered behind him into the manor. Not a body to be seen.
You're as bold as ever, Lady Fen, Song Yuelin said. Or perhaps foolish. We never did finish our last discussion.
I still have the annulment papers, stored within the sleeves of her robes, in fact. Do you dare strike your young master's legal wife?
Do you think that will stop me?
He walked toward her. The pressure of his chi loomed over them like an invisible weight.
When I am well aware of your actual intentions.
Yes.
Song Yuelin held her gaze with stone-faced indifference. Then he smiled.
You are talented.
The pressure receded.
I look forward to seeing how you grow in the future.
What kind of shitty intimidation was that?
The White Tyrant said. Lan Fen ignored him.
Where is Chen Howren?
Song Yuelin shrugged.
Who knows? He dropped a mountain of gold on my head and leapt into a river. I was hoping he would return here.
He will not,
Lan Fen said. There was nothing for him to return to. Chen Howren would not waste an opportunity to slip his chains for such things.
I see that now, Song Yuelin sighed. In any case, I can't dally here. I'll send the bill to the Lan family for the damages. Make sure you collect it.
Will the Chen family be taking action against Chen Howren?
He smiled.
You and the young Master Chen seem to have stumbled onto something amazing.
Lan Fen carefully scrolled her expression. Song Yuelin knew nothing. Any reaction on her part would only harm her. He chuckled and brushed past her.
I hope we don't meet again soon, Lady Fen. For your sake.
He casually waved a hand without turning around.
The world is large, after all.
With those parting words, Song Yuelin disappeared with the wind. The White Tyrant snorted.
Said the frog in the well.
He rubbed his chin.
A mountain of gold, huh? That's not a bad idea. To think that moron could run away.
You underestimated him.
She did as well. That was good.
That would require I have expectations.
Whatever you say.
Lan Fen left the manor. She pulled the annulment letter from her sleeve. Just one last task to complete before she could move on to the next stage.
Has the Patriarch reached the 6th layer of liquid meridian yet?
He's hit a bottleneck, fucking trash.
The White Tyrant scoffed.
You really are related.
He is still within range, then.
That would make it easier. She stowed away the letter.
I will send Xie Jin to search for Chen Howren.
The bug? Is there something special about it?
He will find him.
She doubted Chen Howren would have any idea of where to go. It would be better to have a friendly face to guide the way. Xie Jin was morose anyway after the cancellation of the exams. At least in his way, he could make use of his talents.
Are you having second thoughts about the moron?
The White Tyrant smirked.
Do you pity him for...
Do not.
The White Tyrant frowned.
You've been getting uppity.
You and I are also bound by a deal. In that regard, you are no better than Chen Howren.
You dare!
Lan Fen ignored the White Tyrant's outraged roaring and set a brisk pace toward the City Lord's mansion.
You try to make use of my power, then insult me.
Do you think I won't let you die?
You will not.
I could throw a stone and hit talent like yours. Don't think yourself special just because I've praised you a little.
As you say, Lan Fen replied. Just don't forget to do your part when we meet the Patriarch.
Go find him then. Why bother with the city lord?
I have to annul my marriage.
Then she would get arrested. She had stayed in this city for far too long. It was time to end things. End interlude. Oh, good. At least Chen Haoren will apparently run into Xie Jin again. I like him. He has a good can-do attitude about things. My mouth is really bad today, isn't it? Chapter 52. This young master lacks science. From lost soul to young master, from young master to lost soul. Chen Haoren wondered why his life in particular seemed so strangely cyclical. Perhaps he would become the master of the Spa Cavern next. He had already found a genius to form a connection with. All he needed was an overbearing jackass to complete the trio. Phelps yawned from behind, and he felt the breath tickle his ear. The sloth was well behaved, content with sleeping on his back and begging for more moss. Neither rain nor the constant moving bothered him, for which Chen Haoren was thankful. This would have been a much harder journey if he was uncooperative. Not like it was currently easy. Rain still fell in heavy sheets, and while it wasn't as bad as the steam, it still hindered his vision. Under the torrential downpour, the pools overflowed, and he was left sloshing through the water. He wasn't confident in running just yet with Phelps on his back, so he could only cycle his chi and steadily hike on. The rain soaked his clothes, and the chill in the air invaded his bones. His chi pulsed and flowed like warm water to take off the worst of the cold's bite. The real issue was that it was getting warmer again. He could feel the temperature gradually rise and misty vapor rose from the water. The clouds above were noticeably thinning as well. Soon they would stop entirely. He would only have a short window of visibility between the rain stopping and the steam rising.
I wish I had a mini-map.
Chen Haoren squinted through the rain. He had long passed the outcropping he had been humbled on before. The cavern expanded immensely from this point forward, and he could barely make out the outlines of the towering columns through the rain. They were his destination. He would hunker down and wait out the rest of the storm once he got there. Lightning flashed, and the sound of thunder and shattered stone rumbled through the cavern. He spied a familiar broken silhouette. The best thing about being ridiculously tough was no more stubbed toes, a fact that Chen Haoren was grateful for when he kicked a large stone hidden beneath the water. Before him rose the lightning-struck stalagmite he had first seen when the storm started. Its shattered remains were strewn about the water, their sizes ranging from stones small enough to fit in his hand to minivan-sized boulders. The stalagmite had been whittled down to half its height by the lightning. Even reduced as it was, Chen Haoren had to crane his neck to see the jagged edges above him, like an enormous spear that had been snapped in half.
You really live in a crazy place, don't you?
He asked the sloth. Phelps blinked and opened his mouth.
Freaking glutton.
Chen Haoren reached down to rip out more glowing moss and put his hand brushed against the stone he'd previously kicked. There was a sudden needle-like pain that snapped across his skin. He cursed and jumped back, warily observing the water for any movement. A quick glance at his hand revealed it was unharmed.
I got shocked?
He frowned and grabbed the stone. He immediately felt a dying vibration that tingled his palm. The stone was heavier than it looked, and a glossy blue-gray vein ran through it.
It kept the charge?
He cycled his chi and squeezed it. It was tough. If it was some kind of metal, then that explained why it kept getting struck by lightning.
He dropped the stone in his storage bag and grabbed another fist-sized piece. The electricity arced into his hand and left him feeling pins and needles up to his wrist. He directed his chi in a wave to clear the sensation. Instead, the wave broke as soon as it encountered the residual lightning. Chen Howren felt for his scattered chi and found it bunching up and overwhelming the lightning. He shook off the numbness in his hand and walked over to a larger fragment that came up to his chest. He cycled his chi and focused his sense as he laid his hand flat on the rock. The lightning sparked this time, and he could clearly see his chi being drawn to it like a magnet. Yellow chi bunched together around the lightning and swallowed it, and what remained was chi a brighter color than before. He flexed his fingers and gathered the bright chi to his fist before punching the rock. The surface cracked and he could see the indentation of his knuckles in the tough ore. The lightning improved his chi. It made sense that it wasn't normal. The clouds were made from chi-infused water. Why would the lightning they generated be any different? This chi lightning wasn't water-aligned, however. It had a sharpness to it that he was intimately familiar with. Metal gathers water, huh? Lan Fen did say that metal had a positive interaction with water among the 5 elements. He slipped Phelps off his back and settled him on the rock. Phelps squealed at him for the disturbance. Sorry, boy. Chen Howren fed him a patch of glowing moss. I'm planning to do something stupid. He trudged around the stalagmite, touching as many fragments as he could. Not all of the fragments held a charge, so he was left with little more than a quarter of his chi improved. He cycled the Yellow Dragon River refinement as he did, but despite having an example, he couldn't create the improved lightning refined chi. Rather than an upgrade, it was more of a temporary buff. In the face of unknown potential dangers, however, he would take whatever boost he could get. He walked over to the stalagmite. As he got closer, he could feel the hairs on his arms stand up, and there was a low hum like he was stepping toward a giant beehive. He took a deep breath and firmly planted his feet. Inside his meridians, the yellow dragon danced. He reached out his hands. Phelps squealed at him, and he stopped short of the thrumming rock. Don't be stupid. He backed off from the giant lightning rod and threw over a small stone. There was a spark as it hit the rock, and when Chen Howard picked it up, it was filled with lightning. He looked at it and frowned. It would be too slow to absorb the lightning like this. He still wanted to make the most of his time before the rain stopped, but touching the stalagmite directly was just a bad idea. He looked around at the large fragments scattered around. Maybe he wouldn't have to. If he could channel it, then it might be more reasonable. He was already coming in with an improved chi on top of his enhanced toughness. He could handle it. He walked over to a large bathtub-sized fragment and heaved the rock over his shoulder. He carried it to the stalagmite and stood it up before tipping it over so that it leaned against the lightning-charged pillar. He had a brief moment of cold panic when he realized that he had just connected a giant source of electricity to the water he was standing in. Despite his fears, he remained unelectrocuted. Maybe chi water didn't conduct electricity the same way regular water did. He clapped his hands and patted his sides and grabbed the edges of the connecting rock. His vision went white. His limbs locked in place, steam rolled off his clothes. Lightning outlined his meridians in blue. The yellow dragon furiously roared at the lightning, and they coiled around each other like two fighting snakes. In the world of white, he could only see through his sense. His own light bulb yellow chi and the tower of blue-white lightning that he had plugged himself into. Thinking he could manage the power of the lightning by channeling it through another rock was foolish. If there was pain, he could not feel it. If this was a mistake, he could not regret it. It was working, though. His chi crushed around the lightning and glowed ever brighter for it. The yellow dragon clamped its jaws around the blue light, and he could see the definition of its scales being thrown in stark relief. His reserves grew as the small chi condensed and new chi dripped in from the spiritual rain to feed the process till his meridians were filled to bursting. The yellow dragon roared. His vision returned. Chen Howren looked up, horrified. Lightning flashed and broke upon the jagged crown of the stalagmite. Thunder boomed. Chen Howren stared up at the clouds. He heard Phelps squealing. A burnt smell stung his nose. Slowly he lifted himself up from the water. If he hadn't let go before the lightning struck, then he would have died. He staggered over to Phelps, clutching his heart. With shaking hands, he pulled out a medicinal pill and fed it to him. The sloth sniffed it and greedily chewed it up. Received hundredfold, profound rank spring vigor pill. He summoned the improved medicine and downed it in one go. A rejuvenating energy spread from his core. He breathed. His chi coursed like liquid gold through his meridians. Whatever damage the lightning had done to him had been resisted by it, and was left dealt with by the healing pill. He flexed his chi. The water at his feet surged away, clearing a circle 3 feet across. Phelps squealed in distress as he was flattened by the pressure. Sorry. Chen Howren released his chi and fed Phelps more moss while gently murmuring half-hearted assurances. His mind was elsewhere. The dangers of this cavern were unknown. The benefits got clearer by the day. More lightning fell and struck the stalagmite. No more playing with lightning, though. End chapter 52. It being metal does not actually explain why it kept being struck by lightning. Lightning strikes whatever is highest, not what's most conductive. If the stalagmite is still being hit, it's because it's still the tallest thing in the area. Also, as a bear who's had to touch some live power lines in his life, don't do that. Don't touch the power line with anything that will run power through it. Just don't touch dangerous things if you don't know what you're doing. You will not get superpowers, you'll get posthumously eaten by a bear. On second thought, do whatever stupid thing you want. One moment, please. Had to blow my nose. Chapter 53. This young master gets a boost. Chen Howren picked up the pace after his Benjamin Franklin impersonation. Lightning refined chi bubbled within him and filled his legs with vigorous power. If he had to describe it, it was like being supercharged on an already full battery. Was this what heaven-ranked chi felt like? He didn't know. He lacked an example to compare it to. He bounded across the flooded cavern with loud splashes. He could go even faster if he wasn't worried about accidentally slipping into a pool. Phelps squealed at him as he bounced on his back. Chen Howren had to sacrifice his comfort for speed, but he didn't seem too bothered. If anything, the sloth seemed to enjoy it. Shall we go a little faster, then? He asked. Phelps squealed in response. Chen Howren grinned. Hold on tight, then. He cycled more bright chi to his legs and shot forward, only to immediately lose his footing and fall face first into a pool. He felt the brief, weightless terror that came part and parcel with any moment where one mentally said, "Oh shit," before disaster struck. After his plunge, Chen Howren flopped out of the water coughing and spluttering. Phelps blurbled and slapped his shoulders in joy. At least one of us is happy, he said. He secured Phelps to his back and continued on to the column at a respectably cautious speed. When they finally reached the column, Chen Howren had to take a moment and stare at it. He hadn't known that it was huge when he first saw it from a distance. Seeing it up close, he could properly appreciate just how small it made him feel. Glowing blue moss and melting ice covered the skyscraper-sized rock formation all the way up to the clouds. It was a tower of light in his underground world. They sought shelter under an overhang of rock that circled around the column just above the base. It did nothing for the water on the ground, but it at least kept the worst of the rain from beating down on them. Chen Howren moved a loose boulder in the area under the overhang and settled Phelps on it before stripping out of his wet clothes. The chill in the air was not yet gone, but with his improved chi, he could barely feel it. He ripped moss off the column where it grew in heavy chunks and piled it up next to Phelps. Received hundredfold, waterlight spirit moss. A casual thought summoned a handful of the rewarded moss. Chen Howren was blinded when blue light bloomed in his hand with the force of a headlight. Fuck! He blinked technicolor spots out of his eyes. It was certainly 100 times brighter. The waterlight spirit moss weighed like air and had a soft, sponge-like texture. He fiddled with it, trying to learn what use it had. Channeling chi into it caused no reaction, nor did ripping it in half. Phelps, on the other hand, was intently staring at the moss, saliva dripping from his mouth. Chen Howard smiled and handed it over, watching Phelps devour it with gusto. You better eat well if you want more of that in the future. What he needed to tell Phelps, not that he needed to tell Phelps that. As soon as he was done with the waterlight spirit moss, he turned his attention to the regular growing moss. Chen Howren left him to his meal and wandered off in search of a suitable spirit pool. He picked a shallow one nearby and settled in to let the refreshing energy soak his worn body. He was healed, but the lightning had done a number on him. He had fortunately come out of it without any major injury thanks to his toughness, but it was still a near thing. Perhaps that was the issue. The 10,000-year-old Stygian lotus was by far the most valuable reward he'd received from the gifting power. The enhancement in durability it provided him had been invaluable many times over. He trusted his body to endure whatever he put it through, a faith that only grew with each success. What could he do if it couldn't, though? Recklessness was a loan of luck. What would he do if one day the bill was more than he could pay? Chen Howren sighed. Control yourself. He sank into the water and cycled the Yellow Dragon River refinement. He felt strong now, but it was a temporary thing. He needed to advance. Chen Howren meditated in the pool. The rain patterned its surface with a hypnotic rhythm. The yellow dragon danced like lightning through the refined chi and greedily devoured the water element chi, entering his body in a deluge. He frowned and the spell was broken. The yellow dragon roared in frustration. He carefully checked his body with his sense before cultivating again. The water element chi poured in. Chen Howren opened his eyes before the yellow dragon could feast. It's faster? A person was limited in various ways when it came to cultivation. Chief among them was the spirit root. How fast one could absorb chi and make it their own depended on the quality of the root. With her high-grade spirit root, Lan Fen could make the same progress as Chen Howren in a quarter of the time it took. It was something that endlessly frustrated him, both in the time he had to invest and in the time wasted because of bottlenecks. Which was why he was surprised to find he was absorbing ambient chi faster than before. As the yellow dragon completed its revolutions around his body, he found the speed at which chi was converted was still the same. But even without that being improved, he was still saving so much time. The reason why the speed increased was obvious. Something about the lightning refined chi was causing it. Had it taken on a metal attribute? It was a feasible but easily disproven idea. Each element accorded a different property to chi. His refined chi flowed no differently from his normally cultivated chi and lacked the characteristic sharpness of the metal element. It couldn't have been a change to his spirit root either. His processing speed would have been affected as well. The quality, perhaps? Or the quantity? The lightning condensed his chi in a way similar to when he first switched his profound rank cultivation to an earth rank one. Did chi reserves also affect how much ambient chi could be drawn in? The thought struck him like a bell. Why wouldn't it? He had to cycle his chi to draw in ambient chi after all, like a vortex. Since he was using his chi to create the vortex, then of course improving it would have an effect. Chen Howard frowned and thought back to when he started cultivating. Did he absorb more chi in the seventh layer than he did in the third? His reserves grew larger with each successive layer, so that should be the case. If it didn't, then he would have noticed a steeper drop in efficiency as he advanced. It was probably an increase so gradual that he never noticed it until now when his chi took a qualitative step forward. The yellow dragon danced through his meridians. Each cycle around his body came with a noticeable increase in chi. Ever since he came to this cavern, his cultivation had been getting quicker. Spiritual pools to increase his already long endurance, water element chi that perfectly complemented his spirit root, and an increase in his ability to absorb. Chen Halvern regretted that he only stumbled in here after using up all his cultivation supplements. How fast would he progress if he had some? Maybe he did. Thinking quickly, he summoned another handful of water-light spirit moss and took a large bite, only to spit it out immediately. Chen Howard heaved and washed out his mouth. Okay, not a supplement. On a whim, he stuck out his tongue and found it glowing blue. Chen Howard wasn't discouraged. Putting his latest horrible thought aside, there had to be more growing in this cave than moss and crickets. Things that he could feed to Phelps and use to improve his cultivation. He felt a giddiness bubble up in him, the kind that came from knowing a good future on the horizon. What level would he be when he left the cavern? Ninth layer? Liquid Meridian realm? He laughed. He would become stronger and then, well, he would figure it out. His good mood subsided and he looked up. He'd been so deep in his thoughts he didn't notice the rain turning into a drizzle. A ray of blue light broke through the thinning clouds and Chen Howard basked in it. While it lacked the warmth of sunlight, he would take whatever he could get. In this moment of peace, Phelps squealed. Chen Howard looked around in confusion before looking back up with a horrified expression. Phelps dive-bombed into the pool with a loud crash. Phelps! End chapter 53. Phelps makes me want to go swimming. Maybe I'll play Dave the Diver again and just live with the pain for a bit. Interlude. The Silkworm. Bones and bugs. That was all the southern region had if one were to listen to the snide gossip of the poser nobles from the central provinces. It was an unfair assumption that trickled down from those too privileged to respect anything not their own to the masses who were too poor to learn the truth. That was not to say that the South region didn't have bones and bugs. They did, and plenty of both. Enormous skeletons filled with the majesty of long-dead behemoths, in such numbers that some figured the entire region to be a giant graveyard. Colorful insects were in abundance, great butterflies as large as birds, ants that built golden palaces then marched like drilled legions, spiders with eyes that shined brighter than any gemstone. Insects were respected in the South for their beauty and for their danger. Poison and venom were the great killers there more than any blade or claw. Southern barbarians, it was said, drank venom by the cup and hid poisonous insects in the beds of whoever offended them. Travelers to the south were told to drop silver taels in their drinks at every tavern they visited. It was a lie, of course. Nowhere in this world was truly safe, but the southern region was more dangerous than most of those who were born outside it considered themselves fortunate and those born in it deserving. The southern region was more than that, though. They had mountains that stretched like fingers to grasp the clouds above, lush jungles teeming with life and filled with medicinal flowers and herbs. They had cities, some new, many old. They lined the many great rivers that cut through the jungles and they were home to skilled artisans and bone carvers. They had history. Long before being incorporated into the empire, they had seen many powers prosper among the river cities. Mighty chiefs proclaiming themselves rulers of the rivers and lakes and drew in warriors with their cunning and feats of courage. The Snake King dispensed justice through his sacred serpents. Granny Three Worm wandered wherever she pleased, feeding her grubs old age, disease, and death. Princess Cicada crooned music so beautiful it toppled kingdoms. They had honor. They were the last to be conquered by the Empire. Their warriors had held it all at bay with their bravery and strength, making use of the jungles that they had long called home to stymie any incursion. It was a mark of honor that the Sunset Emperor himself had to personally lead the battle that slew the last free kings of the continent. They had been marked then, the southern regions they were called, for that's all they were in the greater empire. They had a name. Zumulu. It was home. Xie Jin was beginning to question why he left. Another, another, he called, picking off the last bit of meat from his skewer. The stall owner motioned his understanding and flipped over fresh skewers of pork and wild greens roasting over red coals. Behind him was the noise and bustle of the main thoroughfare of Clear Spring City, a long road that stretched from the main gates to the city lord's mansion. Xie Jin snorted and downed the cup of cheap rice wine the stall owner's wife poured him. He hadn't heard of Shen Jianyu before today, but he would not forget him any time soon. The exams were cancelled. Brother Chen and Lan Fen had been missing ever since that liquid meridian realm pulled them away, and he was stuck in this city. Dud bastard! He slammed the cup down onto the counter. I'm going to find every nasty rumor about him and then spread them to every city under heaven. 2 more skewers, piping hot. The stall owner thrust the skewers at him. Xie Jin rummaged through his pockets and dropped 2 coppers before grabbing the steaming skewers and leaving. The meat was tough and stringy and lacked any sort of seasoning, but it was cheap, and that was all he could ask for. Dumb liquid meridian, he said between chewing. At least leave Brother Chen. He continued his grumbling and cursing the higher powers as he made his way into the tournament district, devolving into sullen eating. A hop and a skip put him ahead of a body crashing into him. The man responsible for said flying body roared from the arena, a square of dirt sectioned off with rope. Who's next? Tempers had run high since Shen Jianyu had cancelled the exams. For those who came for means and were valued enough, they would be sent to another city for exams, so missing this one was an annoyance at best. For the rest, the poor, the cast aside, the working, the lonesome, this exam had been a major chance ripped from their grasp. They were either too poor to travel to another exam, or tied down with obligations and work. These lesser were well aware of reality and their lack of ability to change it, so they instead took their frustrations to the arenas. He could sympathize with their anger. Why did the music stop? That's better. He could empathize with their anger. He couldn't afford the journey to return home either. His once grand plans had gone up into so much smoke. He sighed. There were more than a few of his countrymen who traveled to Clear Spring City. Should he just try to return with them? That would invite its own set of unpleasant questions. Not that going back home was any better in this current state either. The challenge seeker, by some hawk-eyed grace, zeroed in on Xie Jin. Come and fight, skeleton! He beckoned his hands in a taunting fashion. Xie Jin narrowed his eyes and slowly chewed the last stubborn piece of meat. I don't fight for free.
50 silvers if I don't shatter you.
Xie Jin casually walked over, twirling the skewers in his hands. He stopped just as he crossed over the rope and sighed. He spotted a familiar shock of white hair. I guess I'm not getting paid.
Getting scared already?
The man grinned.
You southern barbarians have no meat, just bones and poison.
Just for that, I'm going to enjoy what's about to happen to you. The man looked at him in confusion, leaving him unprepared for the hammer fist from behind. It caught him on his temple, and he was sent flying out of the arena, much like his opponent before him. Lan Jia did not spare the man she had so brutally struck a second glance. Her chi flared about her.
You finally scurried out of your hole, you rat.
I wasn't even hiding. Don't pretend you were looking for me.
Where are Chen Haoren and Lan Fen?
Xie Jin shrugged. How would I know? Lan Jia cracked her knuckles.
I'll beat the answer out of you then.
Just say you're here for round two. It's embarrassing. Lan Jia growled and darted forward. Xie Jin flicked his skewers at her face, which she twisted her head to avoid. He darted in low, aiming for her legs. Lan Jia brought her knee up to break his chin, and he rolled to the side. He lashed out to sweep her legs, but she jumped over it, and he was forced to roll again to avoid her stomping his chest in.
Is crawling all you can do?
Lan Jia's palms glowed green. He had seen the move before, a difficult to predict strong palm strike. Xie Jin channeled chi to his legs and closed the distance between them. Lan Jia lashed out, but before her palm could scatter in its myriad patterns, he caught the blow on his bone armband. He felt a burst of pride, seeing Lan Jia's eyes widen as the force of her strike dissipated. Then her second palm slapped him in the chest. He felt weightless as he hurled through the air and landed heavily at the arena's edge. He could feel the rope sitting uncomfortably under his neck. He took a sharp breath and hissed at the stinging pain that ran through his chest. Before he could move, Lan Jia straddled him and pinned his arms with her legs. She slapped him across the face.
Do you think your poison will work now?
She slapped him again.
Did you think you could be my match without such an underhanded trick?
He cycled his chi in an attempt to launch her off. Lan Jia matched him with her own chi and punched him. Although he stood above her in cultivation, one was nothing to someone with her skill.
You were right, she said while punching him. I don't expect you to know where Chen Haoren and that bitch are.
Her palms glowed green.
I just wanted to beat you.
Xie Jin wheezed out something unintelligible. He could already feel his face starting to swell.
Trying to beg now?
She asked. He licked his teeth. He hadn't lost any.
Nice dice.
Lan Jia made a sound of disgust and brought her palms down, only for Xie Jin to spit a stringy, nearly unchewable meat in her face. It splattered across her eyes, and she instinctively closed them. He felt her balance shift, and he flipped them both over till he was on top, and she had her neck on the rope. He drove his knee into her gut and wrapped the rope around her neck. He pulled. Lan Jia bucked and thrashed under him like a wild bull. Xie Jin's sloppy pin failed, and Lan Jia sat up. He wrapped more rope around her neck and spun behind her, sitting on her back and squeezing her arms with his legs. It was ugly and disgraceful, and he pulled the rope taut, and Lan Jia flushed red. Whatever commotion was going on in the crowd, he couldn't hear it, focused as he was on choking Lan Jia. Hopefully, no one would intervene. He would really have to run if that happened.
Xie Jin.
A voice called out to him, and he ignored it. Lan Jia was beginning to gasp. Whoever was trying to stop him would have to throw him off.
Xie Jin.
It was strange that someone was calling his name. If it was someone who knew him well enough like that, then they wouldn't be trying to stop him.
Xie Jin.
Someone was tapping his shoulder. What? He whipped his head around and found a girl with steel gray hair calmly watching him.
A moment of your time, please,
she said. He stared. Lan Jia sputtered. I'm a little busy right now.
I can wait.
It's not a matter of waiting. He turned back to Lan Jia while racking his brain for just who this girl was. He gave the ropes one final pull, and Lan Jia's eyes rolled into the back of her head. He felt her grip slacken, and he held on for 2 more seconds before releasing her. She slumped over, and he pushed himself off her and patted his dusty clothes. Do I know you? He asked his next problem.
My lady is Lady my master is Lady Lan Fen. I assume you are acquainted.
He frowned. I am. Is there any news from them?
My master asks if you'd like to leave the city.
Looking at the strange servant of Brother Chen's scary wife, Xie Jin wondered once more if he should have ever left home. End interlude. If Lan Jia had a proper bear neck or proper claws, that rope would have been useless. But I guess humans can't be choosers. Chapter 54. This young master finds some steroids. When the rain finally stopped and the clouds dissipated, he wasted no time packing up Phelps and rushing into the now clear horizon. The cavern was dyed a sapphire blue under the light of the newly exposed glowing moss. With no obstructive weather and chi enhancing his vision, Chen Howard soared across the flooded cavern floor, Phelps squealing all the while on his back. As if by some cue, the cavern came to life with the ceasing of the rain. Across in the distance, he could see packs of sloths floating from the water back to the ceiling, their distant squeals echoing out to him. Phelps did his best to answer those calls with his own. Naturally, they attracted predators. The monster crickets crawled out of their hiding places in force, with tens quickly becoming hundreds in short order. Their chalk-like chirping destroyed the brief harmony of the cavern, and they quickly made a menace of themselves. Chen Howren whipped out the swift-winged scimitars and cut to pieces any cricket that got near. He kept moving all while he did so. Every second of clear vision was precious, and he could ill afford to waste his time on fighting. Hello, Pope Badger. Unfortunately, the crickets had other ideas, and it wasn't long before he was pursued by 30 jumping freaks of nature. Every so often, one would have a strong enough jump to catch up to him, and he would kill it and leave the corpse to be devoured by its brethren, giving him time to increase the gap. After Chen Howren killed yet another cricket and watched 5 more stop to fight over it, he had to wonder who was real. They were really hunting him or themselves. Not that he was complaining. If the crickets had any sense of teamwork, he would be having a much rougher time. That they were so individualistic and prone to hunting each other just meant, as much as they did anything else, meant that he wasn't in too much danger despite being heavily outnumbered. He twisted and slashed another cricket in half. That didn't mean they weren't annoying. In one breath, he cycled his chi in the canyon carving sword's pattern, and in the same breath, he released it. It was tantalizing to see what sort of power he could bring to bear now with the canyon carving sword, but it would be an incredible waste to use it on the crickets. The effects of his advanced chi were far too valuable to carelessly spend it, especially when he didn't know if he'd have another opportunity to replenish it. As it stood, he was already losing the lightning refined chi through the augmentation of his body and his cultivation practice. It was a minor but steady trickle that he could scarcely notice with his regular chi, but was now painfully aware of. More crickets closed in ahead of him in an attempt to cut him off. He channeled chi into the crouching tiger earrings, and the ambushing crickets scattered at the sound of a tiger's roar. It wasn't just the crickets. Off to the side, a mass of water rose out of a large pool. Chen Howren did a double take at the tank-sized sloth that floated out. He stretched out his sense. 9th layer. He split in the opposite direction while the majority of the crickets jumped after the sloth instead. He didn't look back when he heard the giant sloth and crickets fighting, but he could feel Phelps twisted on his back. "You better not grow that big," he said. He had left the last pursuing crickets and moved on to bigger problems. Literally bigger. The further he went into the cavern, the grander everything became. From the stalactites to the pools to the height of the cavern itself. It did not bode well for how long it would take him to find the source of the cold snap, and even now he was forced to go around when a lake or hillside stalagmite sat in his way. The temperature sat at a comfortable warmth, as if he had returned to a heated house after stepping out into the middle of winter. The air was getting more and more humid with each breath he took, and some of the hotter pools were billowing steam. Soon he would lose his vision, and his traveling speed would be cut drastically in a place that even at his full speed would take a long time to clear. "How does something this big exist under all these Mountains. Phelps looked up from the pile of moss he was working through and squealed at him. They sat on the shore of a warm lake. Chen Howard stripped out of his excess layers and was tending a roaring blue fire. He picked up a piece of glowing moss and channeled his chi into it. Where his chi went, water was wrung out of the moss like a squeezed sponge. He shook the now dry and dim moss and tossed it into the flames before picking up a cricket leg. Using his scimitar as a skewer, he roasted the leg over the fire and then cautiously took a bite. "Tastes like chicken," he mumbled. It was a comforting lie, although he had to admit it didn't taste as bad as he thought. The leg had a nutty, slightly smoky bitterness to it. Not his favorite by any means, but it was palatable. He pulled out a small pouch of salt from his storage bag and sprinkled it on the leg. While he had prepared rations on the off chance he got stuck in Lan Fen's pocket space, he had a feeling he'd run out before he got anywhere near an exit. He tore another strip from the cricket leg when he saw Phelps bouncing away out of the corner of his eye. Chenharan sighed and trudged after him. The sloths of this cave were always a curiosity to him. How they lived, how they acted, what part chi played in their lives. Normal sloths were slow because they were burdened by a low metabolic rate. How would a sloth with access to far more energy move then? As it turned out, not so much different after all. Unless he had a reason to be quick, Phelps was content to move as little as possible. When he did decide to move on the ground, he used his floating power to bounce across the ground much like an astronaut would do. "Maybe I should name you Neil," Chen Howard said. That being said, it wasn't often that Phelps decided to move of his own volition like this. Chen Howard followed him along the shore and saw him stop and paw at something on the edge of the water. He knelt next to Phelps and gently thumbed at the soft petals of the flowery vine that grew across the ground and into the water. Naturally, it was also blue. The blue light given off by the moss had camouflaged it enough that he overlooked it when they set up camp. Gently, he ripped a fat petaled flower off the vine and held it towards Phelps, who happily ate it. Chenhauern held up a hand to his snout to stop him from eating the rest and read the words that burned in his vision. "Received hundredfold, pure water monk flower." Chenhauern frowned in thought. He reached over and cupped some water in his hands and held it out to Phelps. The sloth cocked his head but lapped at the cool pool water. "Received hundredfold, pure spirit spring water." Pure. When he first discovered his great gifting power after giving Lanfen a drink, the reward at the time was called pure spirit water as well. He picked another flower off the vine and ate it. The flower melted in his mouth, and he felt its energy drip down into his core before moving through his meridians. He immediately summoned the rewarded monk flower, and the rush of energy was much greater than before. He felt his chi rise. He'd found his cultivation supplement. "You better be hungry, Phelps." Chen Howard ripped off the rest of the flowers from the vine and dropped them in front of Phelps. Then he dug around, looking for the vine's roots. If Phelps could eat the whole vine, that would be so much better. He could finally have his own cultivation supplements without having to rely so much on merchants. Would they even sell something as good as these monk flowers? The cultivation supplements he had used before certainly didn't compare to them. Across his eyes burned golden words as Phelps devoured the flowers. He found the roots. There was a burst of chi next to him. Phelps's fur bristled, then flattened in one smooth, flowing motion. He spat out a pure white breath. Chen Howrens reached out with his sense. "Fifth layer." He smiled. Congrats on advancing, bud." Then the other fifth layer he sensed in the water attacked. End chapter 54. Congratulations, Phelps. I told you all tickets taste that. I told you all that crickets taste fine. But no, don't believe the bear who eats bugs. What would he know about bug flavors? Let's press on. I want to hear more about this attack. Chapter 55. This young master discovers. Chen Howard noticed the monster too late. It was too close, and though beneath him in cultivation, he wasn't so far beyond it that he could stop it from striking. So he didn't. When the crocodile-sized salamander breached the water and opened its maw to swallow Phelps whole, Chen Howard placed himself in front of the monster and let it clamp down on his arm. Phelps rolled into a floating backflip and shrieked from the air. The salamander flailed and tried to drag Chen Howard into the water. He flexed his chi and swung his arm down, crushing the salamander's head into a gooey mess beneath his forearm and the earth. So this is what lives in the water. He shook off the salamander brain goop and washed his arm in the pool. Phelps dropped back down and squealed at the corpse. Real scary, Phelps. Chen Howard ripped up the rest of the vines out of the ground, then split open the salamander with his scimitar and pulled out a rough cyan core. I don't suppose you eat these too, he said, waving the core in front of the sloth. He was only half serious, but Phelps took it as permission and snapped the core out of his hand. Chen Howard had a brief moment of wide-eyed shock. Beep, don't eat that! He rushed over and tried to wrench Phelps' mouth open, but the gluttonous sloth swallowed the core whole. Damn it, Phelps, spit that out! Phelps shuddered and his body expanded. Chen Howard braced himself for the inevitable shattering glass feeling of a broken connection. Phelps burped and deflated. He stared. Phelps happily squealed. He stretched out his sense. Phelps' chi had grown. He sighed and rubbed his fist on Phelps's head. Greedy little shit. You damn near gave me a heart attack. Phelps's gluttony aside, it was good to know that he could feed him cores. He hadn't thought that things were edible like that. Not that he would try to eat them himself. Monsters hunted each other. It made sense that they could process cores as well. It was a shame that he didn't intend to give the core to Phelps, so he'd missed out on getting a reward. He brought over the monk flower vine and showed it to Phelps, who, perhaps finally being full or just plain disinterested, merely sniffed it and turned away. Chen Howard stowed away the vine in his storage bag to try again later and looked at the dead salamander. He had been expecting to find an aquatic monster since he entered the cavern, but it wasn't as strong as he had assumed. He looked out across the lake. The waters were still. He took the corpse in hand and tossed it into the water. He watched it float for a few minutes, channeling chi to his senses to catch any movement. There was none to be had, however, and so he packed up Phelps onto his back and turned to leave. He would have to hunt elsewhere for more salamanders, it seemed. There was movement on the water. A giant salamander leapt out of the water like a breaching whale and snapped up the crocodile-sized corpse in one bite. Chen Howard watched the titan slap back down into the water and felt the water kicked up mist his face. He turned around and left. He would have to hunt elsewhere. As he had both feared and expected, the steam returned quickly, and he was forced to slow his pace to a veritable crawl lest he tripped into a boiling pool or a hidden monster. Much like the landscape, the monsters grew grander in both size and cultivation the further he traveled into the cavern. Hulking sloths jambled across the roof and floated with dense pressure. The crickets grew more vicious, their spiny forelimbs became razor-sharp blades that, combined with their higher cultivation, forced Chen Howard to fight them cautiously compared to how casually he treated them before. The salamanders were even more ridiculous. Received hundredfold, 100-year-old Chi Realm Giant Salamander Core. He killed another salamander just like the one that tried to eat Phelps, only to discover that they were basically juveniles. He had been expecting any water-based monsters in the spa cavern to be particularly strong given the environment, but it was an ugly surprise nonetheless. The salamanders were just as vicious as the crickets, leaping out of their pools to bite at anything passing nearby. Their sneakiness, combined with the steam, meant more often than not Chen Howard was scrambling to avoid a sudden ambush. A task that he failed more often than he succeeded. Without the Stygian lotus flower's enhancement, he would have been injured numerous times when he failed to react quickly enough. It was to the point that he was forced to detour around several large pools to avoid another Titan salamander. He was lucky enough to avoid meeting any Liquid Meridian realm monsters so far. It was not a luck he expected to last. The caverns were too rich in energy and resources not to have a few higher realms wandering around. If things kept getting stronger the deeper in he went, then it wouldn't be long before he had to meet one. He hoped it would be a sloth. Anything else, and he would be facing a fatal threat to his life. It wasn't like there were no benefits to all this danger, however. Shenhauern found more monk flower vines growing along the edges of the pools. Phelps had no taste for the vines, unfortunately, but he devoured the flowers without issue along with monster cores. Shenhauern made sure he was eating plenty of moss as well. A task made easier by the fact that even the moss improved as they traveled, becoming brighter and thicker than before. The ambient chi of the cavern as a whole seemed to increase, in fact. The air was thick with it. The pools boiled with vitality, and the steam, of course, was the best of both worlds. Shenhauern's cultivation speed had taken off like a rocket compared to before, and it became quicker the further he traveled. Environment, spirit pools, refined chi, supplements, everything had finally aligned to bring him into the eighth layer faster than he could have ever imagined. For all the danger this place had been, constant blessing after blessing for him. For all the danger, this place had been constant blessing after blessing for him. Forget the eighth layer, he already had his eyes set on the ninth. If only the other side of his practice was so smooth. Chen is a very smart man. I too would leave and not look back if a salamander did that. Yes, I would also do that. Not because I'm scared, but because obviously a salamander that size would have eaten anything worth eating in the area. I'm sure as a bear I could beat it in a fight. Not at all scared. Not at all scared. In the shadow of another giant column, Chen Howard practiced the canyon carving sword, while Phelps curiously watched on. He cycled his chi in the long familiar pattern and flowed into a few basic sword movements. As he swung his scimitar, the steam around him ebbed and flowed as it avoided the blade. As it was cut by the blade, rather. The steam split just before it touched the scimitar's edge and flowed over and under it. Chen Howren counted 30 seconds before his steam-cutting dance came to an end and he lost control of his chi. 30 seconds of harmonization. It was a definite improvement from when he started, but Chen Howren couldn't find it within himself to be satisfied. Lan Fen and Song Yue Lin wielded harmonization as if it was another part of their bodies. No, not as if. It really was just another part of their bodies, the natural expression of a technique they were deeply in tune with. There was something he was missing, something about harmonization that diligent practice alone wouldn't solve. Something that Lan Fen and Xiong Lin didn't, or perhaps couldn't, say. Chen Howren sighed and sat against the column, idly counting the cracks in the ringing overhead of stone above him. That's a weird sentence. The column was much like the last one he had camped under, just a bit taller and with brighter moss. It said something about how crazy the rest of the spa cavern was that this strange geology was the least noteworthy. He pressed his back flat against the mossy rock and crossed his legs in a meditative pose and closed his eyes. Phelps's squeals broke through his nascent concentration. He opened one eye and glared at the sloth. Phelps innocently stared back. Chinhauern snorted and closed his eyes again, and Phelps squealed before he could fully concentrate. All right already. He stood up and cut a square outline in the moss behind him. I've seen bodybuilders eat less than you. He pinched a corner of the square and ran his scimitar underneath it, channeling his chi to the blade as he brought it up under the moss while pulling on the corner. He had to jimmy his impromptu razor through the center of the blanket of the moss he was carving out as it kept getting stuck. Soon enough, though, he had peeled enough off that he could rip off the rest in one piece. Underneath, the moss was the smooth rock of the column, and he quickly found that what his sword got stuck on, a long, jutting line of rock that curved and twisted like a pattern. He frowned, exactly like a pattern. Chenharan chopped and ripped more moss off the column, a sinking feeling growing in his stomach as he exposed more curving lines and etchings of leaves and fruit carved into the rock. There were limits to how strange geology could be, even in a place as crazy as this. He ran out from the uniform overhang of stone and leapt atop it. He ripped off more moss and exposed a deep groove that he was sure ran all the way up to the top. He cycled Chi to his legs and ran a loop around the column, stabbing and ripping and finding more grooves evenly spaced around it. This wasn't natural. Those columns weren't formed, they were built. End chapter 55. Is it a bad thing that they were built? I mean, that seems like a fairly reasonable thing considering how strong these cultivators get. They're going to build some big things, right? Though I guess I'm very strong and I have built very little. Alright, I guess I get it. There must be a lot of very weak things building this place. Why is my mouth not working today? I'm afraid that's where we end today as well. Surprisingly, despite not being as much as I usually read, it's ended up taking a similar amount of time to go through. We'll be continuing tomorrow with Stray Cat Strut, the story of Miss Cat, who is the eponymous stray cat, who's serving to try and kill all the aliens before they eat everyone on the planet. I look forward to seeing everyone there. If you're behind, the YouTube channel of the same name as mine has VODs of previous readings, in case you wanted to catch up or go over something you missed. Now I'm going to see if the raid button wants to work. The raid button does not want to work, so I wish you all a good evening. Pope Badger, I thank you for coming. Silent Watchers, I also thank you for coming, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Good night.